Russian President Vladimir Putin is digging in on one of his key demands to end the war on Ukraine. President Putin vowing that Moscow will seize Ukraine's Donbas region by military or other means. It comes as the Ukrainian source tells CNN a delegation from Kyiv is travelling to Miami for a fresh round of peace talks with their American counterparts. That's after a lengthy meeting between Putin and US negotiators in Moscow this week that ended without a compromise. Well, let's get the latest from international security correspondent Nick Paton-Walsh is live in Kyiv. So, Nick, how do you read Putin's comments as this Ukrainian delegation prepare to meet with the Americans? And does this set back progress, in essence?
Yeah, look, I mean, he's not just saying he'll either take Donbass through diplomacy or by force. He's saying he'll take Donbass and Novorossiya, which is a term, frankly, we haven't heard for quite some time. Historical, used at the beginning of one of the first or the second invasion in 2014, and referring to a significant swathe of Ukraine that Russia, from sort of Tsarist times, claims is essentially its territory, probably pointing to the remainder of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions that are not occupied by Russia. So essentially, Putin perhaps returning to his most maximalist territorial ambitions for Ukraine. Is this part of a negotiating strategy? Did he actually receive the proposal from Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, in the Kremlin on Tuesday more welcomingly, with perhaps greater recognition for concessions? We don't know. We do know that Ukraine's top negotiator is in Miami today, going to be getting a proper debrief from both Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and his envoy Witkoff, presumably going through the more detailed elements of the Kremlin response, if indeed there was detail to that response. It may simply have been that Putin took whatever concessions were being presented to him after these lengthy US-Ukraine talks, trying to get something together, and said, no, I want more. But there has been a significant flurry of activity by the Europeans, by the Ukrainians. Most of it, I'm sure, an element of debriefing to try and be sure everyone's aware of exactly what the results of those meetings were, but also probably to a bid to show there is continued diplomatic activity to find some kind of compromise. But it's really been Russia who've offered the most detailed assessment of that meeting, talking about a 27, 28-point plan, 4 other separate documents, and essentially saying no compromise was reached and they saw no immediate need for Trump and Putin to meet. Remember, Trump has said, I'm not really going to get involved in this until the deal is done. He also yesterday talks about how he thought that the meeting had gone well, and indeed that the US-Ukraine relationship or their proposal had gone well. It does appear at this point that the Kremlin have dug their heels in about what territory they want. We still don't publicly know whether a concession or a land swap was part of what Witkoff brought with him. We've heard very little from Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, in terms of the detail of what was offered or the detail of what he's willing to go along with. That is clearly by design. He had a press conference today that turned into statements only, essentially, in which negotiations were not mentioned alongside his Cypriot counterpart. So a lot not being said, a lot of activity being projected by Ukraine and its allies, and I'm sure some details too to be imparted in Miami in these forthcoming talks. Where does it go? I think the fear is that the Ukrainians with the European allies want to certainly maintain this sense that work is being done, that there is compromise to be reached, that there is activity they can engage in to prevent the likely next phase of this. We've been through this process so many times before, and that's White House frustration that often ends in pressure on the negotiating parties. In the past, we've seen Trump realise it's easier to pressure Ukraine and do that rather than pressure the Russians. And I think that's what many in Kiev are fearing here. They need to keep this feeling like it's moving forwards or risk potentially another bout of threats potentially from President Trump.
Nick, thank you. Let's turn to New Delhi, where Russian President Putin arrived a short time ago for a 2-day state visit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is hosting a private dinner for his guests tonight ahead of their summit on Friday. It's Putin's first trip to India since the start of the Ukraine war, and comes as Modi tries to steer a diplomatic course that balances India's relationships with both Russia and the US. For days now, Russian and Indian flags have been flying in the Indian capital, with posters of Putin gracing public places and government buildings. Well, joining us from New Delhi, senior international correspondent Will Ripley. So, Will, high on the agenda for Putin's visit are more defence deals with Moscow. The question, though, is how much support is Putin likely to get?
Well, it seems as if things are off to a good start. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was at the airport. He greeted Putin as he walked off his plane, and the two jumped into a limo together and they sat and talked as they drove to that private dinner. It's a similar scene that we saw play out in China after the SCO summit a few months ago, where they actually stayed in the park limousine and talked for nearly an hour. So the two have a warm relationship that has been on display publicly repeatedly in recent months. See them, holding hands, smiling, joking. They did the same thing together with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And so we already know that a number of deals are basically already negotiated, and the two are going to be signing them here in Delhi tomorrow. Deals on energy, deals on fighter jet sales, and potentially even technology sharing, with Russia offering to help India domestically produce the Russian fighter jets that are the backbone of their air force. There's also on Prime Minister Modi's agenda an effort to try to rebalance trade between the two countries. Right now, India is buying a lot more from Russia, especially when it comes to the cheap oil that's been on sale ever since the Ukraine war began. Russia's not buying a whole lot from India. Prime Minister Modi is under political pressure here to change that. So there's a lot that they can do. And of course, they know the optics are important, and somebody in the White House, specifically President Donald Trump, is going to be watching very closely. After that summit in China, when they got in the limo and talked together, President Trump, I think it was on Truth Social or somewhere, basically said he thinks that the U.S. lost India to Russia. So obviously, he loves to be in the room with these guys as well. He likes to be part of the conversation. And the fact that he's sitting on the outside watching the two of them projecting confidence, projecting the fact that they have leverage and they have other options besides the United States, that's got to be getting under his skin just a little bit, even though both Modi and Putin have a lot that they need to sort out with President Trump. Modi would like to get a trade deal secured with the United States. He'd like to dial down some of the tensions that have been rising in recent months, particularly over the purchases of Russian oil. And of course, we know that Russia, as Nick was just saying, they're talking with the United States about ways to end the war in Ukraine. But it seems like they feel on the Russian side they have a lot of leverage. And this trip to India, Putin showing that he has strong, powerful friends, including the leader of the world's largest democracy, certainly bolstering his case that he doesn't really have to give up much. He can keep on fighting until he gets what he wants.
Will Ripley in New Delhi, thank you. Well, we're joined now by military analyst Frans Stefan Goddy. Frans, it's great to have you. I'm sure you were listening in there. And, I just want to start with this latest line from President Putin vowing that Moscow will seize Ukraine's Donbas region by military or other means. I mean, when we consider the talks that have just happened this week, it was somewhat predictable, was it not, that Putin was always unlikely to accept any deal when the odds right now are currently stacked in his favor, both on the front lines and diplomatically?
Yes, you're absolutely correct on this matter. Vladimir Putin, Russia, thinks that it still has military options and that it currently is winning on the battlefield in Ukraine. Russia is taking significant casualties, but it is slowly advancing and attriting Ukrainian forces. So it was always unlikely that Russia would accept a temporary ceasefire or even commence serious peace negotiations, just because it is still in the process of creating military facts on the ground.
I mean, we are in effect back to square one potentially, but with options now more exhausted for Ukraine than in previous rounds of peace negotiations. You've said that Ukraine now faces a terrible catch-22, which is to agree to concede the Donbas in exchange for a fragile peace, or fight until Russia forced to and take it from them. But are Russia's chances of that so certain, given they have failed to achieve taking the Donbas and other land after 4 years of intensive warfare now?
Well, war is always highly contingent. Of course, it's unclear whether Russia can accomplish those objectives over the next couple of months or in the next couple of years. However, having said that, it is clear that the war overall is not going well for Ukraine, that it is trending slightly negatively for Ukraine, and that Russia currently is making advances in the Donbas. So it's probably likelier that Russia is going to gain additional territory in the Donbas over the next couple of months than not. So I think time is actually on Russia's side in this matter. The West, Trump, NATO, other supporters of Ukraine may have clocks, but Vladimir Putin and Russia certainly have time to just wait out the West.